I didn't expect you to return from your vacation with a report. It was a surprise to us as well, my lady, Ludmilla replied. But it was still something of note that we felt important enough to bring to your attention. Placing several magical decanters of fresh blood into her inventory, Shiltir Bloodfallen frowned down at the sheets of paper spread out over the desk in Ludmilla's room in Warden's Vale. Dressed in her casual equipment, the Baroness used a clean spell from a magic towel before rising from her bed to join Shiltir. Shiltir would usually take the time to savor her vassal after an extended absence, but several details in the report took priority over her usual indulgences. It took her time to understand the implications of the information contained within the report from her 4 noble vassals, but, by the time she refilled her last decanter, it was apparent that the matter would have to be brought to the attention of minds greater than her own. An agent from a foreign land who thought the region that Nazarick had found itself in was a backwards land of weaklings and rife with empty posturing. Something deep within her stirred, perhaps anticipating the appearance of new adversaries far stronger than anything they had seen before. Tormenting the weak was all well and good, but breaking the strong was far more delectable. After all, the further one fell, the greater the despair and suffering that came with it. What new delights would this world offer up to her? What new opportunities to prove herself worthy of her master's service? A slow smile crept over Shiltir's lips as she imagined what the future might have in store. Do you desire any further clarification or review on the content of our report? Ludmilla asked. A basic idea of what is going on is sufficient for now, Shiltir answered. If I may ask, what will be done? That depends, Shiltir said. The others may have information relevant to this report. We will review and analyze everything before deciding what actions should be taken and whether the matter merits His Majesty's attention. There wasn't anything else, Arinsuka? No, Ludmilla shook her head. There were too many unknowns and we had no explicit instructions on what to do about this sort of threat. I apologize if the response was insufficient. Shiltir wasn't sure what the appropriate response was, either. If she had been present, she would have probably dominated the subject of the report on the spot and wrung out every little bit of information from him. Going by the details on the report, however, her actions would likely result in catastrophic failure. These cheeky weaklings and their unknown magics. Shortly after Nazarick's arrival, their master had brought in a few dozen humans to interrogate for information about the region. They were all part of some sort of special unit, so it was expected for them to offer up a wealth of knowledge. Instead, they gained little. Some strange magic simply triggered to terminate the men upon answering 3 questions. No one in Nazarick knew of any spell or item that could accomplish this, so they were forced to accept that their new world hid many potentially dangerous unknowns that could thwart Nazarick's efforts despite their laughable weakness. You've done well, Ludmilla, Shiltir said. There is no need to second-guess yourself. You have been entrusted with responsibilities and I have every expectation that you will continue to fulfill your duties to the utmost of your ability, Arinshu. Hopefully, your friends will make up for some of our shared deficiencies. It will certainly be the case, Ludmilla replied. They may need a bit of time to adjust to life as your vassals, but everyone looks forward to working in your court. Good, Shiltir smiled slightly. Speaking of work, I believe a contingent of Death Series servitors is eagerly awaiting your arrival. Yes, my lady. Though I must say that I'm more than a bit anxious about this first assignment. Anxious? We're clearly outclassed. Or it would probably be more accurate to say that the configuration of our forces is unsuited for this task. The last time Ludmilla had pointed out an issue with military deployments, she had been correct. At least within the bounds of how she conducted warfare. Demiurge noted that, while her battle in the upper reaches produced decisive results while limiting risks to nearly nothing, Ludmilla's grasp on the use of Death Series servitors was somewhat skewed in favor of defense. Strangely enough, her use of the Elder Liches was profoundly skillful. It seemed backwards for someone who was supposedly new at deploying magic casters but a natural at mundane strategy and tactics. Months had passed since then, however, and if you looked with interest to what new developments she would come up with. You'll be able to call upon Ilishnish, Arinsun? I will, but this is an ancient dragon we're dealing with. The combined forces of the Death Series servitors should be sufficient if the fight stays on the ground, but the gap in power between our aerial assets is vast. Demiurge and Cocytus consider it the ideal exercise for this very reason. The value of this exercise is undeniable, but, At the same time, failure will be catastrophic for the Empire and a mark of shame against the Sorceress Kingdom. Then the answer is simple, aren't you? Shiltir said. Don't fail. As for this gap in power, you of all people should understand that battle is rarely so straightforward, aren't you? Yes, my lady. Ludmilla lowered her head respectfully. Shiltir opened a gate to Fiobukana. Her vassal checked over herself one last time before stepping through. After collecting the report laid over Ludmilla's desk, Shiltir cast greater teleportation, arriving in Erantal's central district. From the gazebo, she walked under the light of the afternoon sun to the office of the Department of Transportation. The vampire bride at the reception greeted her with a bow. Welcome, Shiltir Summer. Shiltir produced the report, holding it out towards the vampire bride. 10 copies. Immediately. The vampire bride received the report, disappearing up the stairs. Shiltir turned and idly paced down a hallway as she used a message scroll. Pandora's actor. If it isn't Shiltir. By your tone, I take it that there is a pressing matter to attend to? There's a report that you should look at. I'm having copies made at the moment, aren't you? You will be contacting the others then? I'll let Albedo know after you've had the chance to take a look. Are you in Erantal? I'm on my way out of the Adventurer Guild's main office right now. Will Momon's guest manor be secure enough? I think so. The threat doesn't appear to be imminent, aren't you? I'll see you there. It took an additional 5 minutes for the vampire bride to return with the ordered copies. Shiltir found Pandora's actor casually strolling up his manor walkway in the guise of Momon. Where's Nobe? Shiltir asked as the doppelganger let her into the manor. Debriefing one of the casters coming out of a platinum-ranked trial. I wasn't aware that she did that. She must, occasionally. Nobe is an adamantite-ranked adventurer, after all. And while her feedback might be sharp, she is an excellent war wizard created by the Supreme Beings. Her expertise is especially valued by the evocation specialists in the guild. Also, while she might not admit it, Nobe is picking up some of their tricks and tactics, as well. Inside his office, Shiltir produced one of the copies to hand over to the doppelganger. The sound of a flipping page occasionally broke the silence of the room. This can't be a coincidence, he murmured. Is something the matter? I was just thinking about how everything seems to slide so perfectly into place with Anne Summer's guidance. Even as one blessed with superlative intellect by our master, I cannot fathom how this has been brought about. Shiltir brightened at the idea that everything was moving according to the will of the greatest of the Supreme Beings. Then everything should be all right, Aransuka? It appears that Ain Summer is satisfied with our work and has raised the curtains on our next stage. Our master never fails to astound me with how precise his calculations are. As expected of one of the great minds of Nazarick, Shiltir couldn't discern even the slightest hint of what Pandora's actor spoke of. What does this information mean? Shiltir asked, is there something I can do to help with Ain Summer's plans? It is better not to know for now, Pandora's actor answered. Albedo will think something is amiss if it appears that you understand too much. She is quite overprotective of her role as the Guardian Overseer, so it's better not to ruffle her feathers if it can be avoided. Worry not, however, this is important enough to call a meeting in Nazarick. Things will become apparent enough. I got it. With a nod, Shiltir left Pandora's actor, exiting Momon's guest manor and making her way back towards the gazebo in the gardens. Pandora's actor was, of course, correct in his assessment of Albedo. Just as the Floor Guardians might get jealous if they thought that someone else was performing their rightful duties in their place, the Guardian Overseer might get jealous if she felt that someone might be advising the Floor Guardians about their tasks. There was nothing inherently wrong with doing so. The Floor Guardians put their heads together on various things all the time, but Albedo was specifically created to perform functions that often overlapped with how they managed their new responsibilities in the Sorceress Kingdom. Shiltir wouldn't exactly call it being a busybody, but if Albedo saw something that she thought she could offer useful input on, she would. Sometimes it was helpful, other times one simply had to smile and nod. She was that way by the will of the Supreme Beings. If Shiltir understood things correctly, Albedo had even adopted the Empire as a sort of area as well, sending all sorts of finely detailed requests regarding their administrative operations. Perhaps she was practicing for the eventual takeover of the Riastais, which apparently needed much work to turn into a respectable area of the Sorceress Kingdom's sphere of influence. Shiltir went from the gazebo in Erantal to the cabin outside of Nazarick, hopping through the teleportation gates to arrive at the 10th floor. There, she found Albedo in her usual place, scanning through the guild base's administration panels. The Guardian Overseer dismissed the panels with a wave of her hand as the tapping of Shiltir's heels approached. "I've received a report," Shiltir said from the bottom of the stairs to the Throne of Kings. Albedo came down to retrieve the proffered documents in Shiltir's hand. The slits of her amber eyes dilated as she furrowed her brow. "How long have you had this for?" "It was delivered to me less than 30 minutes ago, aren't you? Why didn't you come to me right away?" "It took me a little while to understand what it was saying." Shiltir looked to the side with a frown. The Guardian Overseer let out a small sigh, turning her attention back to the report. "Help gather the Guardians," she said. "The NPCs deployed in Erantal, as well." Cocytus was the only NPC who required a gate, as he was overseeing army training in the Azalisia Mountains. Aura arrived with Maya. Demiurge teleported in from the Holy Kingdom with Shizu. Nabrul brought in everyone from Erantal, including Pandora's actor, Sebastian, Yuri, Entama, Solution, Negredo, and Pestonia. Lupus Regina's assignment in Carni village was only a short run away. As they lined up in front of the Throne of Kings, Albedo's gaze settled on Demiurge. "How go things in the Holy Kingdom of Roble?" "All has been prepared for Iron Summer's arrival." Demiurge's smooth voice seemed to carry additional zest. "According to his escort, it should be 3 days until Iron Summer arrives with the paladin contingent he left Erantal with." "Making Iron Summer travel overland like that," Shiltir muttered. "Surely we could have teleported them over?" "A suitable amount of hardship and suffering is required for our stalwart paladin friends to invest themselves into their struggle," Demiurge smiled. "If Iron Summer teleported everywhere and solved every problem himself, everything certainly would have been over by now. But if it were to be done so simply, so too would Iron Summer's contributions be cheapened in their minds. There is little appreciation for true power amongst the natives of this region, as has been demonstrated time and again." Shiltir studied the floor. Did that make any sense? While she did appreciate extended suffering as anyone else would, it was hardly something to waste their master's precious time with. "So," Aura said, "why did you call us all in?" "There has been a report of activity beyond our immediate region," Albedo said as she held up the papers in her hand. "News of Iron Summer's great victory nearly a year ago has sent ripples out into the world. Now, it seems that an agent has appeared." "Agent, like a spy?" Mayor's eyes glinted, then his expression faded. "But Iron Summer said that we should leave spies alone unless they try doing something they aren't supposed to." "And a most prudent decision this was," Demiurge nodded sagely. "The many agents sent to us from other nations are of insufficient effectiveness against the Hanzos and 8-edged assassins we have deployed around sensitive areas. Their attempts at divination are similarly a simple matter to thwart thanks to the efforts of Negredo. Thus, they can only see what we wish for them to see. Yet, at the same time, their activities are a valuable case study for how intelligence operatives function in this world." The Guardian of the 7th floor paused to allow those in attendance to digest his explanation. Demiurge looked up towards Albedo standing at the right hand of the Throne of Kings. "Might I have a look at this report?" he asked. "Ah, I made copies for everyone," Shiltir spoke up. Aura made a noise as Shiltir produced the extra copies. "If you had them in the first place, then say so." "Wah. Albedo's the one who's dangling the report in front of everyone with that smug look. I want my consideration back." The atmosphere cooled considerably as those in attendance reviewed the information from her vassals visiting the Empire. As if to punctuate their feelings, Cocytus expelled a blast of frozen air. "This, a greater threat? Preparations required." "Their belligerence is not guaranteed," Sabos noted. "To provoke hostilities would be against Iron Summer's orders and will damage the image we have built up for the Sorcerer's Kingdom by his command." I believe you two have skipped several steps," Pandora's actor said. "Rather than a threat, this is an opportunity, is it not, Demiurge?" "Indeed," Demiurge's tail swished idly as he smiled. "All of the essential pieces have already been deployed. Iron Summer has already read everything well in advance and set events in motion. He was so confident that his plans would work out that he could embark on a leisurely carriage ride to the Holy Kingdom to assist in mine. Shaking his head silently, the Archdevil sighed. With every revelation, Ein Summer demonstrates his supreme mastery of events. Every time he intervenes in our affairs, I feel so hopelessly outmatched by his peerless wisdom. One can only wonder what seeds will be sown by his hand in the Holy Kingdom. Are we truly ready to exploit this opportunity? Albedo asked Shiltir. Shiltir blinked in surprise upon being addressed. Me? Everyone else in the throne room stared at her. Shiltir shifted nervously. Albedo narrowed her eyes. Pandora's actor let out a low chuckle, joined shortly after by Demiurge. Ein Summer is truly unfathomable, Pandora's actor said. Understanding is not required, all one must do is act. Several of your agents have been deployed in the Empire, have they not? Demiurge asked. One, in particular, is ideally suited for our purposes. She should have garnered quite a bit of the right attention by now. Spies, my lady? That's what they want. Have you found any? I'm not sure if they're the spies you're looking for, but there are about 70 of them following us around these days. 70? I don't think you can mishear people over message, but they're not very good spies. Most aren't much better than a common human. Oh. That doesn't sound like what they had in mind. I don't think we need them right away, so shop around a bit. I want the best spies you can find. May I ask what you need these spies for, my lady? Understanding is not required. You have your instructions. Lady Shiltir's message spell cut off, and Elishnish blinked away the pouring rain. An ocean swell lifted her as high as the walls of Rantel before she was lowered into a similarly deep trough. She cleared her throat and dipped her head apologetically. Sorry about that. It happens. So, what are you doing in my domain? I wasn't aware that it was, Elishnish replied. It's difficult for my kind to detect sea dragon domains. I get that much. That's why you're not dead. Before Elishnish loomed an ancient sea dragon by the name of Corinth Extralin. Though only his neck and head stuck out of the water as the winter storm raged around them, she was well aware of how large and powerful he was. Clad in dulteal scales and measuring nearly 40 meters in length, he dwarfed Elishnish and could easily bite her in two. A human in the city south of here is looking for a fish. A fish? Corinth Extralin's long, drooping whiskers twitched. Why? I have no idea, Elishnish replied. All I know is that they're paying well for one. 30 gold coins for a male and a female. The big trade ones, not the little coins from the Baharuth and Riestais. That's not bad. I know, right? They rose with another surge of the storm. Corinth Extralin eyed the distant shoreline with a thoughtful look. What kind of fish is it? Something called a phantom polar snapper. The description said it has 2 blue stripes and can cast invisibility. Ah, I know what they're talking about. You've missed them by a few months. They've migrated around the Argland Peninsula and down towards the equator already. Arg, I knew it was too good to be true. Well, thank you, Lord Corinth Extralin. I suppose I owe you a favor now for saving me so much time and trouble. What about a piece of advice? Sure, let's hear it. A new terrestrial nation has appeared at the southern end of the Azalizia Mountains, one called the Sorceress Kingdom. The rulers there are ridiculously strong, so if they come this way I would advise that you cooperate rather than resist. They came to your domain? That's right, Elishnish said. My father, the Frost Dragon Lord of the Azalizia Mountains, was instantly slain when he attempted to resist. We've been working for them ever since. In terms of raw, physical might, Frost Dragons would be close to the bottom of true dragons alongside Brass Dragons and Shadow Dragons. They each had advantages that somewhat made up for this, of course, but raw strength was the universal gauge by which dragons tended to size up threats at a glance. Also, an ancient dragon like her father was still nothing to scoff at. The Sorceress Kingdom was rather underhanded in the way that it didn't make such differences clear from the outset, so Elishnish considered it a valuable piece of information to exchange. Strong enough to instantly slay an ancient, is it around that time again? I guess so. Around what time? Things like that show up once a century or so. I guess you're too young to know. They usually stick to the surface of the continent, so it's generally not a problem for the rest of us, but I will keep your words in mind." With that, Corinth Extralin turned around and swam away. As his head sank towards the waves, he muttered something about hiring merfolk to catch some phantom polar snappers the next time they came through. Elishnish dove 5 lengths before reversing direction to launch herself out of the ocean. She twisted in midair before winging straight back towards distant harbor lights of the city on the bay. She concealed her presence when she came within 2 kilometers of the city, gliding silently over the harbor and walls of Nixhaven. If one went from west to east along the Northern Imperial Highway, Nixhaven was the second of the cities on the Golden Strand, the prosperous northern coast of the Baharuth Empire. Though the ocean trade was subdued due to the inclement weather of winter, land routes continued to run, bringing goods from the inland territories. The city also hosted a small shipyard and naval station for the Imperial Army, and the territory surrounding it consisted of well-developed agricultural land. It was a popular place for wealthy citizens to escape the summer heat, so the city was larger than it probably should have been. Modest villas nestled in small estates occupied several rises overlooking the rest of the city and the sea, though they were mostly dark for lack of residents. Banking into a steep dive, Elishnish assumed her human appearance as she dropped into the alley beside the city's Adventurer Guild. She peeked out from the shadows before making her way into the plaza and up the stairs to the entrance. The hubbub of the hall quieted upon her entry. It was the part of her job to market the Urantal Adventurer Guild that she hated the most. They wanted her to be seen, and thus she couldn't conceal herself when picking up or submitting commissions. As a frost dragon, this was naturally a bad thing since they tended to ambush their prey, and there were many beings that could harm or even kill an adult. Frost giants were the most well-known of these, and there were also threats like other types of powerful giants, rival dragons, polar worms, various monsters and rare strong mortals. These rare strong mortals included certain adventurers, so walking into a lair of them exposed and vulnerable always made her nervous. Dozens of eyes followed her as she made her way to the reception desk. It was expected behavior for humans, but, at the same time, it felt like it had become a ritual of sorts. "Welcome back, Shiva," the receptionist smiled. "Thank you," Elishnish smiled back. "I've completed these 2. She set down 2 of the jobs she had taken earlier in the evening. They both called for the cold-blooded murder of innocent families in their homes by the Imperial administration, which was a simple matter to accomplish. The adventurers in the hall seemed to quiet even further as the receptionist picked up the commissions. "The pacification of the Scrag tribe in the North Cape Tidal Caverns," the receptionist said, "and the removal of the monstrous crab colony near Wheaton Harbour." As the commissions were read out, Elishnish placed several receipts from the Merchant Guild on the counter. A group of merchants on a route to Arwinter had immediately purchased the rights to the dead monstrous crabs that she dumped onto the rocky beach near their home. She settled on liquidating the Scrag bodies to the local alchemist guild. Elishnish was somewhat divided over eating one of the crabs, which was admittedly delicious but was also worth quite a bit as luxury food. While she didn't get much for the Scrags, they had accumulated quite the sum of treasure in their lairs. Overall, she would be roughly 90 platinum trade coins wealthier from the corpses and loot alone. The receptionist finished flipping through the receipts, gathering the sheets together and tapping them neatly on the desk. "I've confirmed the receipts," she said. "Thank you for your hard work, Shiva." Low conversation rose from behind her as the adventurers discussed the results. They were both Orichalcum rank commissions that had been left unfulfilled for over a year. Supposedly, this meant that they were harder than their difficulty rating suggested, but Elishnish couldn't tell at all while she was dispatching her targets. After she collected her pay of 12 platinum imperial coins, she set the unfinished commission on the desk. "I realized that phantom polar snappers are out of season after I left," Elishnish told her. "Sorry for the trouble." As expected of an adamantite bard, the receptionist said. "Your knowledge is vast. The employer wasn't aware of it at all, and neither were we." Out of curiosity, Elishnish asked, "Do you not interact with the aquatic demi-humans living in the seas nearby?" The receptionist stared at her blankly for a few moments before shaking her head. "Not at all. Though there are occasionally raids conducted by Sea Naga and Sawajin against our coastal villages, if that counts." "How often do these raids occur?" "Along the Golden Strand, almost never. Attacks become more frequent past Norfeld and the east. Undead like Draugr, sea ghouls and chillbones do sometimes appear if you wanted to know about possible threats to the area." "Ah, no, I was just wondering if commerce or something similar went on between the Empire and the neighboring kingdoms to the north. Kingdoms?
No, I don't think so.
The receptionist looked past Ilishnish's shoulder as if looking for help from the adventurers beyond.
No worries,
Ilishnish told her reassuringly.
As I said, I was simply curious.
She wasn't sure if someone who processed bounties on people would know or care,
but it was worth the attempt.
So far, it appeared that the Baharuth Empire's maritime trade routes only connected to ports in Riastais and the City-State Alliance. Speaking of commerce, she continued, how is that escort commission coming along?
The escort? Oh, yes, the forecaster from the army station said that things should be clearing up sometime tonight.
We have several dozen merchants already signed up for the trip to Niedereileen in the morning. Are you sure this is all right? A caravan escort is only a platinum-ranked commission and the pay is split between all of the members.
It's fine, Ilishnish said. I was heading that way anyway and it's an opportunity for me to learn a few things. I may be adamantite, but that doesn't mean I know everything, yes?
Murmurs of admiration rose from behind her.
Humans were strange.
Power, wealth and other displays of superiority impressed them, yet the notion of humility and offering obvious truths did so as well. Sometimes it felt as if everything that she said and did worked in her favor no matter how stupid it felt. After obliging a half-dozen questions on the way out of the Adventurer Guild, Ilishnish walked through the drizzle to the merchant inn that they had stayed in for the past 2 days. She concealed her presence and entered through the back, stopping at the stairs to the second floor to double-check her surroundings. 2 of Zusharu's apprentices were sitting at tables with what appeared to be local merchants. Several spies or whatever they were, kept an eye on them from a distance. They occasionally glanced around the inn's tavern with bored expressions. There were 8 or 9 of them when they had arrived at East Estate and that number grew to 24 by the time they left. That number, in turn, had tripled by the time they reached Nixhaven, though the specific individuals appeared to shuffle themselves around. At first, the majority were women. Now, they were mostly men. Humans were a species where, all else being equal, males were generally larger and stronger than females, but they all seemed equally weak to Ilishnish. Recalling Lady Schultier's new orders, she examined each of them carefully but could identify no individuals that stood out. What was she even supposed to do when she found them? Confused over the vague orders, Ilishnish let out a sigh before ascending to the second floor of the inn. She found Zusharu and his other apprentices sitting around the floor with their ledgers scattered around them. Ilishnish placed one of her infinite haversacks on the table near the suite's beds. I have more inventory for you, Ilishnish said. Zusharu looked up from his work, whiskers twitching in her direction. Zusharu's inventory is becoming very strange, he said. It cannot be called an ore stand anymore. Your ore inventories are 2/3 gone already, Ilishnish replied. Plus, you were too scared to buy lumber so you should be happy I'm filling it with something. It is 2/3 gone because the stand has become so big. Zusharu did not expect this. We have gone from a stand to a shop. That's a good thing, is it not? Lady Wagner and Lady Gonnier will be astonished by the time we get back to the Sorceress Kingdom. The Quagoa merchant made a long sound, then walked over to examine the contents of the infinite haversack. He reached inside and pulled out a strand of kelp. What? I'm sure that was wrapped around something. Ilishnish went over and started to empty the magical container. Several small chests went onto the table, followed by several adventurer teams' worth of equipment. After that came 2 tapestries, 3 rugs and a metal contraption she had no idea about. Zusharu reached out to grab a trooper's towel to clean the items and clear away the reek of scrag. Since her first evening in Ingelfort, Ilishnish took a few adventurer commissions every night they stayed over in a city. There had been no adamantite ones available thus far and any orichalcum commissions tended to be those left untouched due to strange conditions or particularly problematic opponents. While these jobs paid well, what Ilishnish found that paid the best were those involving corpses that were used for materials and targets that hoarded valuables. Thus, her adventures became a non-stop procession of murder and pillage sanctioned by the imperial administration and its citizens. Never in her admittedly short life of 108 years had she ever expected to be paid and lauded as a hero for committing such deeds. Though fearsome when one was a prospective target, things became very different when on the delivering end. Adventuring had turned out to be everything Ilishnish had read it to be. She hired Sushiro to sell her spoils at his stand for a small commission. Her riches piled up and happiness filled her whenever she thought about how much larger her hoard would be when she finally got home. Sushiro lifted the lid of the first chest, revealing its glittering contents. He picked up a spherical object, sniffing at it with a suspicious look. Limestone?
I think it's a pearl, Elishnish said.
At least it looks similar to the pearls on display at jewelry shops. Strange. Smells common, yet seems valuable. Now you know how I feel. Pearls and a few other things aside, some people's sense of value is utterly strange. Oh, by the way, the receptionist at the Adventurer Guild says that the weather will be clear for travel tomorrow morning. Let Miss Gran and her minions know as well. Where is she, by the way? Miss Gran left the inn with the others before you returned, Sushiro replied. Something about meeting a friend at the Eastern Gate. Don't worry, Ida, we're waiting for you at the gate. We really are, really. Huddled together away from the rain at Nixhaven's Eastern Gatehouse, Nemel and Elise listened silently as Fendros spoke to Ida through a message spell. Fendros' expression seemed calm, but it was as if she were trying to remain that way to ensure that her voice was equally so. Fendros' face fell into worry several moments later. Gods, she said, Ida's so scared. Nemel and Elise looked down with equally worried looks. They could only imagine what Ida was going through. After settling into their roles at Sushiro's merchant stand, they contacted Ida in our winter to inform her of the good news and warn the last member of Fendros' trio to not participate in any of her parents' desperate ploys. To their surprise, Ida was not in our winter, but somewhere in Meterless Lane, the region northwest of the imperial capital. She had fled after she found out that her parents were in negotiations to sell her to a slave trader from the city-state alliance. Bonds of blood were the most important thing to nobles. Even as former nobles, such values were deeply ingrained into one's identity, and family was the final refuge for the attainted. Most scions did their best to help hold things together and hopefully improve everyone's situation. To be betrayed by them. Nemel scowled at the rivulets of water running over the cobblestones. Some nobles lost everything because they were too competent and just happened to support the wrong side of the struggle for the imperial throne. Others couldn't hold up to the stringent standards of the reformed administration. A few were genuine idiots. There were also those, however, who were absolute scum. Is that her? Nemel looked up at Elise's question. She squinted out into the rainy darkness, then put on her flight goggles as she realized Elise had probably cast a spell that allowed her to see in poor lighting. In the distant murk, a hunched figure slowly made its way forward. The frigid winter wind coming off of the shore lashed against it, sending its mantle whipping out to the side. There's someone there, Nemel said, but they have their cowl pulled over their head. A half-minute later, the figure resolved into something slender and feminine-looking. Fendros stepped forward, then jerked as a hand clapped over her shoulder. She glanced back at the Imperial Knight Captain who had stopped her. In return, the captain shook his head at her before casting his gaze over at the other side of the gate. Orist. Got it. The knight who replied hefted his shield and spear. Pelting raindrops sounded against his plate armor as he advanced from the gate. Creaks sounded from above as the rangers on the wall prepared to provide cover should something go awry. So this is the Second Legion. Nemel couldn't help but admire how they carried themselves. They were good, professional men who watched out for the citizens and took risks on their behalf. What everyone imagined soldiers of the Imperial Army to be, the soldiers that all who enlisted aspired to be. They were a far cry from the dregs of the 8th Legion and the tired sergeants and officers who worked endlessly to whip them into shape. Orist returned with the figure, shield held out against the rain as he gently accompanied her through the gate. Ida. Fendros threw her arms around the soaked figure. They went to their knees as Ida collapsed in tearful relief. Elise came up beside her and, together, she and Fendros started leading her into the city. Nemel turned to the captain. Thank you so much for opening the gate, Captain. The captain gave her a quiet nod before looking up and ordering the entrance closed again. Nemel caught up to the others on brisk steps, accompanied by the sound of the portcullis being lowered. She leaned forward to look into the shadows of Ida's cowl. An ashen face under unkempt strands of orange hair stared out wearily with pale, trembling lips. It took them 15 minutes to slowly make their way back to the Merchant Inn. Nemel went ahead as Fendros and Elise helped Ida up the stairs. In their suite, she found that Dame Verilyn had returned. Zushiru and his apprentices were piled up in a litter made between two of the beds. Their wheezing snores filled the air.
"Ida is here, Dame Verilyn," Nemel said. "I was wondering who the fourth person was," Dame Verilyn replied. "She seems quite exhausted. She came all the way from Meterless Lane in a week. Caravans usually take 2 to cover the same distance. The poor girl must have barely slept." As Fendros noted, she must have been terrified. Fleeing a family that betrayed her. Traveling alone from our winter, which was 600 kilometers distant by way of the Imperial highways. Looking over her shoulder at every sound, wondering if the Slavers were coming to get her. The roads weren't safe, either. Though the Imperial army patrolled them regularly, one could still be attacked. There were highwaymen and demi-human tribes in the untamed places waiting to pounce on the vulnerable. This was especially true as daylight waned and even the developed lands of the Empire could become a dangerous place for humans who were disadvantaged in the dark. Staggered steps sounded from the corridor. Then they stopped, replaced by whispers and the rustling of cloth. Nemel went over and poked her head out of the doorframe. Around the corner, Fendros and Elise were fussing over Ida's appearance. "What are you doing?" Nemel whispered at them. We can't bring her in like this," Fendros whispered back. "What if Dame Verilyn doesn't like what she sees?" Ida was weakly trying to keep up with their efforts, but it was clear that no amount of fixing up would help her present herself properly. Not to mention that Dame Verilyn was probably aware of Ida's condition the moment she entered the inn. "She can barely stand," Nemel told them. "Let her rest for." A soft, rhythmic strain drifted through the doorframe and into the corridor. An invigorating, industrious sensation sparked to life within her as ghostly visions pulled at the corners of her mind. Hammers sang over glowing metal as short, stocky figures tirelessly worked in the dim light. Shaping. Making. With the wisdom of the ages, they forged the future. Nemel blinked as the song faded, but the sensation that it had instilled within her remained. What? The weariness of the long day was gone, soreness from standing for hours in the market plaza vanished. In its place was a strange energy. Nemel slowly flexed her fingers. Why was she just standing there? She needed to do something. "Master," a lively Quagoa voice sounded from the room, "we must work." "Work?" Another apprentice seconded. Okay?" Zushiru's voice was confused, but not reluctant. "Then let us put the new inventories away." A moment later, the Quagoa filed out of the room, carrying chests and tapestries and bundles of equipment. "Oops," Dame Verilyn said. "I suppose I overdid it." In the corridor, Ida no longer slouched. Color had returned to her face and a sharpness replaced the dull look that was in her eyes. She went back to fixing her appearance with the others. Nemel returned to the room. "What was that, Dame Verilyn?" "A spell song," Dame Verilyn replied. "A fragment of one, at any rate." "How was that a spell song?" Most bards worked in civilian vocations intended to perform songs and literature for entertainment, but Nemel had heard spell songs at least once or twice. At best, they could be called disjointed fragments of sound stitched together into something that one could only understand bits and pieces of. The spell songs still took effect, but comparing those that she had heard in the past to what Dame Verilyn had just performed was like claiming that struggling through a book full of shredded pages was the same as reliving in the events that it once conveyed. It was said that spell songs varied from bard to bard and that rendering spell song was dependent on skill, but the sheer difference between Dame Verilyn and everyone else Nemel had heard was unimaginably wide. She wasn't even sure if spell songs were supposed to do what Dame Verilyn's had just done. Does that song have a name?" Nemel asked. "Does it need one?" Dame Verilyn tilted her head. "You know what it is from hearing it, do you not?" Somehow, she did. The fact that she did confused Nemel all the more. "I don't understand." "Oh. Did I mess up somewhere?" "No." Nemel quickly put up a hand in front of her. "I meant that I don't understand why your spell songs are so different from the ones I've heard in the past." "Well, I did mention how those other bards we've heard are rather lacking." Nemel suspected that if any bard was made to compare themselves to Dame Verilyn, they would simply quit being a bard. In fact, Nemel didn't think she could see other bards the same way that she once had. "I experienced something when you performed that spell song," Nemel said. "What was it?" "It was a moment in time," Dame Verilyn replied, "rendered into song. The moment when the forges of Theoburkana were ignited anew,
The rebirth of the Dwarven Kingdom under the Azalisia Mountains. I was there to capture its very essence. Out of that essence, I composed a song. Now, everyone that hears the spell song in its true form may experience what it was like to be there as well. She wasn't aware of the location or what the event might be called in the histories, but she felt it. The heat of the forge, the ring of the hammers, the thrum of the bellows, the conviction of the craftsmen who toiled to restore their long-lost ancestral home to its former glory. Resolve, pride and hope swelled within her. Just as if she was one of them. Just as if she was there. I was wondering what Zushara meant back then, Nemel said. Do all bards compose songs like this? I believe so, Dame Verilyn replied. If one has ears to hear it, they can discern what lies within the broken pieces of the songs that these local bards perform. An attempt to capture or reconstruct an event, feelings, soul. Plucking the strings of the world in an effort to bring the past into the present or render a concept into reality. It is a tragic representation of mortal existence. Time steals all things away from them, leaving constructs that function without meaning, their original purpose forgotten. Does that have anything to do with what you said back in East Estate? About answers that you're seeking on your journey? Something about the soul of humanity? Yes, that's right. The answers that I seek are elements that I consider necessary for composing proper spell songs. The song of the Baharuth Empire. Where would it take its listeners? What would it show them? Thinking more about it, she felt very small. Everything that Dame Verilyn saw would be part of a song in the keeping of an immortal being, one that could be conveyed long after any memory of the Baharuth Empire had long crumbled to dust. Nemel shivered as she thought of her own experiences, those of her acquaintances and friends. What would it sound like? What would people think of what they heard? A knock issued from the door. Nemel went to bring Fendros, Elise and Ida in. They lined up in front of Dame Verilyn, and Nemel eyed Ida's expression. A noble's mask was fitted snugly in place. It looked like Ida had at least for the moment wrestled down her recent ordeals. Nemel cast several spells to shield the room from external observation. Dame Verilyn, she said. I have the pleasure of introducing you to Ida of Vendée Lost Wig. Dame Verilyn, Ida curtsied deeply. Thank you so much. Words cannot express my gratitude for allowing me the opportunity to serve. Your thanks is noted, Dame Verilyn replied. But it means nothing to me. Rather than words, you may express your gratitude through your work. Ida appeared taken aback by Dame Verilyn's reply, but Nemel took comfort in their exchange. The Frost Dragon was perfectly capable of conducting herself in the forms of Baharuth's aristocracy or any other social strata, but acting in such a fashion was simply a means to an end. It was when she spoke in a direct and to-the-point manner that Nemel felt that Dame Verilyn was treating someone seriously. Some stories said that dragons became more guarded or talkative when they were on the defensive or thought they couldn't get what they wanted through brute force. If a dragon felt like they were in control, however, their true nature would manifest. Nemel's education as a member of the Imperial Air Service held that frost dragons were solitary and feral by nature. As she came to better know Dame Verilyn, Nemel wondered if feral translated to honest or straightforward when it came to intelligent beings. If the stories were right and this was Dame Verilyn's true personality, Nemel figured that she would be more than happy working for Dame Verilyn. It was much preferred to the opaque dealings and endless machinations of the imperial aristocracy. What was, there was no need to pretend to be something that she wasn't, and she could focus her energy on the truly important things. In that case, Ida did not raise her head. I hope that my work will please you. You may consult with Miss Nemel and the others about what you should be doing for now, Dame Verilyn said. Though you may want to head over to one of the beds within the next 6 seconds. 6 seconds? They stared at Dame Verilyn in confusion. Nemel felt the strange effect of the spell song ebb away. Ida wobbled and fell face first into the wooden floor. The frost dragon in human form let out a small sigh. Understanding is not required, she half muttered to herself. As Fendros and Elise struggled to bring Ida to a nearby bed, Dame Verilyn rose from her seat and headed towards the door. Where are you going? Nemel asked. To the yard, Dame Verilyn answered. There are some Quagga there who need to be carried back up.